you're saying that because you have a review based on, I mean, you have a level of confidence in that based on what you've seen during the review process as far as documentation?
I'm saying that because we have already tested 43% of the expenditures of the draw request, and we have looked at bank statements and information out of this QuickBooks, for the entire contract period.
Up to June 2014.
Right, through June 2014.
Again, I believe we should do that.
That's basically what you want to do.
I know at some point we need to let him proceed on down the road and develop his company, but at this point I think we need to have that one more board committee decision based on
Well, if you're gonna make a motion to do this, then I'm not against it. But I think your motion, if you're gonna include CLA, you need to make sure they want to do it before you put it in the spot.
We can't do that.
I think what they're
For a lot of
saying is
reasons.
certifying statements from Mr. Bond's CPA.
Right.
Certified
That's what-
statements
Yes.
that,
It will come with an accountant's report, compilation report, and the financial statements will accompany that report.
Then the real issue is that, is the data going to be satisfactory to reconcile the differences? Will you accept? I have a word for whatever
Wait
this
and
is.
see what it says.
Well, if his compilation shows that he did in fact put more money into the project than he received from us, is that going to be adequate for the board to accept the differences in the question costs? If you would tell me exactly how you would like to reconcile this, I would attempt to do that, but I'm not certain how to.
Well, I think we should disallow the call.
Okay? On what basis? Just because they found them and questioned them?
Well, I think this speaks for itself.
How does it speak for itself? They are questioned costs. They are not costs, they are costs that have circumstances around them. Doesn't mean they're illegitimate. So how do you unilaterally say every one of them should be disallowed? On what basis?
Well, maybe
I'm
not.
good with that. If you could go,
Well, maybe not every one of them should. I do question when you charge 15%, but you only spend 10% on overhead and stuff like that. There's a lot of questions in this thing that are just not answered.
but even in
about
doing
money,
that,
about money.
he's saying that, yes, he charged a flat rate, it was excessive, but the money that came through the draw was actually spent with other expenditures that we have a record of.
Well, see.
They don't count?
No,
Why?
because it wasn't part of the contract. You don't spend, take money and do something,
But it's,
that's questionable with the money, Bill.
If the draw
You want to be
request-
reimbursed for it because you know.
okay, let me ask another question, Donald. If, so let's say that we went that route. We said, we're gonna disallow these costs.
Yes.
Had we done that as you proffered before during the project on a month-to-month basis, would you agree that that money would have still been in the grant for them to draw on for costs that we agreed were not question costs?
If this thing had come out zero and said everything was great, then we wouldn't be going into this. But this thing is
I agree, but
1,500 pages of question cost of stuff. We just can't overlook that.
so what I'm saying is if we had done this on a month-to-month and we said this month we're not gonna allow these costs, that money would have been left in the grant for them to draw on.
Well, probably what would have happened, that when Mr. Bond come before this board every month for a draw request, nobody on our staff had looked at any of this stuff. We just accepted it as fact Nobody went
I
through your
beg
record.
to differ with you on that.
Then why didn't you catch this?
Because the draws are estimates, they're not precise
That's what
reimbursements.
I'm saying.
Well, there'd have been no way with a startup company that was taking over a project to have precise draw requests from reimbursements.
Well, what was-
Every month, he's ramping up. He added 12 or 15 new employees here in Hardee County. We had no idea how the expenses were going to be partitioned out between us and them relative to Tech River. He was guessing with projections, and it was allowable under the contract. It's no different. Most financing projects allow for initial draws, and they evolve into reimbursement.
Well, according to our CPA here, it was not allowable. It should have been reimbursed.
No, that's not what they're saying. They're just saying that these are
It's
question
not
costs.
allowable, it's questioned.
That in the CPA world, they did not have the documentation to justify it in its entirety. So they're not saying that it's allowed or disallowed. They're saying these are the things we think you should look more into as a board.
Well, what was
So
it?
if we just unilaterally said, okay, we're gonna take that total and we're not going to allow it, the money would have still been left in the draw. I think we've all agreed that their payroll has been something we've given consideration to this entire time, right? Salaries being paid to their staff. That's something that's easy to prove, easy to verify. So had the money still been there in January and the contract was extended to June, we would consider those costs, the payroll, let's just say payroll for argument purposes, let's just say payroll alone, for him to continue to make draws based on his payroll. Would you say that's fair?
You better say that again.
So if we would have disallowed these costs along the way, in a month to month, like you're talking about, in January, he would have still been left with all of that money.
If these costs had been disallowed in the beginning, we wouldn't be going through this.
Well, we would still be, I think we
It would have been straight.
7.65 balance to 7.65.
We-
Spend.
and we would still be going through an audit and review process. I don't think any of us
We
has
haven't
ever,
been through an audit.
has ever said that we don't think that we should go through some sort of reconciliation at the end of this project. What I'm trying to say is, had the money been handled that way and disallowed along the way, he would have still had that in January of 2014 to draw on. The expenses have continued since then and increased because staff has increased. So if you're saying that you propose we disallow all of those costs,
Yes.
are you saying that you think we should consider costs from January to June, which are not currently being considered in this review? Because the contract is still in place through June, he still maintained the payroll, nobody was laid off, the project continued and launched, marketing continued. What are you comfortable accepting? Had the money been rejected then, it would have still been there. So do you think it's fair to say that we should consider some of his investment toward that?
No.
That's where I think we need to understand why you feel that way.
Because I read this. This is what tells me. It tells me everything that CLA put in here. It says, these are questions. This is some things like the licensing thing, that we should get some kind of a business development person to look at this stuff. There's other things in here that we recommend that you look at get somebody else that's more expertise in these things to look at this. There's a lot more in here than just dollars.
So you think, and rather than just consider his payroll for the last 6 months, that we should maybe pay a couple $100,000 to someone to review the project in its entirety to see if our money was well invested?
What is money to us? The way we throw money around? What's $100,000 or $200,000?
So is that what you're proposing?
I'll make a motion to have whatever, a forensic audit or whatever if you want me to.
Do you have any idea what a forensic audit is going to cost? Do you have any idea?
Did you just hear what I said?
Yeah, do you know?
The way we throw
how much
money
would a
around?
how much would a forensic audit cost in this case, please?
It
I
wouldn't
would hate
matter.
to throw a number out, but it's probably gonna cost, almost as much as what the question costs are.
Exactly.
But
Yeah. $100,000, $200,000?
I guess the,
We throw that much money away monthly.
I guess the consideration is though that the contract ran.
How do you say that?
Yeah, I would like to know
Where have we thrown money away? I don't really understand how you sit on this board and make a statement like that. You said we throw that much money away monthly.
Well, that was just a figure of speech, Bill. But we do spend a lot of money. It's just like the incubator thing down there. We have no contracts with those people down there. I think it's $8,000 a month for the light bill and stuff like that. I mean, we need to this board needs to take control of this board.
We need to stay on task, and this is exactly what I'm referring to, when you make these wild random accusations, and I don't know where you're coming up with this.
Well, I don't know where you're coming up with it just to allow all of this stuff.
I'm not saying I'm allowing anything, I'm trying to have a reasonable debate with, I'm asking you questions. You're the one that sits here and says, if anybody here doesn't wanna be asked questions, there's an issue with that.
Well, I just give you the answer 3 or 4 times. This is what tells me to disallow it. This right here.
Does this report tell Donald Samuels to disallow these costs?
That report just says those are the costs that we question.
Are they disallowed?
That's the board decision.
So Donald, where do you get from question costs that they're disallowed?
Well, we can go over one by one if you want to. It may take a couple of days. But they're in here. You need to read this.
Once again, I've read it at length. I've studied it. I've gone back. I've asked Mr. Bond questions directly. I've asked Bill questions directly. Have you done any of that?
Who?
You. Have you asked anyone outside of these board meetings?
No, I do my talking on this board right here just like you should.
Which is why you don't seem prepared for some of these debates.
No, you need to do your talking to the public, not behind closed doors.
I probably spend 20 hours a month at minimum getting up to speed and understanding all of this.
Well,
And I'm not retired, so I don't have any intention to stay here for 24 hours in a month. I'm sorry, Gene, go ahead.
Mike, whenever you're talking about the billing and excess of expenses, is that total expenses or just maybe in one category you didn't?
The billing,
Is that
there were two sets of overhead that were charged on the contract, on the draw request. One was for general expenses, 15% of salaries were to cover general expenses. Discussions with Mr. Bond, just because he said administratively it was a lot easier to do than rather than to try to put every single $5 invoice on there.
In other words, it could be that maybe it was claimed under one expense and it was spent in a different category.
Well, again, we had a detail that we received from Mr. Bond, what made up that actual overhead expenses for the months that we tested. And we tested, about 70% of those total expenses. And we came up with a different number, but we still came up with an overbilling amount for those months. But again, I guess I just would suggest that instead of getting caught up in the weeds, the contract ran through June of 2014. Mr. Bond was spending about $300,000 a month. The last draw that was paid out was a partial month that was only $56,000. That was paid in January 2014 for December expenses. So Mr. Bond went essentially 7 months of additional expenses that could be applied to this contract. And if you look at $300,000 a month for 7 months, that's a good bit of money. So the question is, even if you disallowed the whole $140,000, would he still be allowed to apply the expenses that he incurred after the draws finished toward the additional money that would be freed up?
If we get the financial statements up, we're really going to show us one way or the other.
If you get the financial statements, then you'll have a number that shows you how much he actually spent, and you can compare that to how much he actually received in draws. during the contract period.
If this board allows these costs, is that gonna be setting a precedent for the future?
I think it's a case by case, when it comes to questioning cost, I think it's a case by case situation. I think you have to take each case as it is and see if the costs that are questioned were legitimately put towards the project or not. Or whether they didn't relate to the project and should be reimbursed.
Lord, was that a motion that you made while ago?
Yes.
A second.
Lord, for the record, will you please repeat your motion?
My motion, I think if I remember correctly, was that we would wait until, vote on this until we receive financial statements from Mr. Bond at the next meeting.
And is that the motion that you have seconded, Jean? Do we have any further discussion from board members? Any other comments from our presenters on the matter? Agreeable with all parties?
Yes.
Any other comments from board members? If not, we will open for public comment. Mr. Kirkland?
I think that,
Can't hear you.
they can't hear me, so
Speak up.
speak up.
There, that's good.
You hear me now?
Yeah.
Now you hear me? We have a presentation that we were gonna, several of us present in the little 3-minute thing. This presentation, you will have government health.gov documents in front of you with highlighted paragraphs and stuff. We'll give you light years more education than what you're getting from Mr. Bond, which does not hand you anything to validate what he's saying. Not saying he's not wrong, but he doesn't give you any documentation. I have the documents here today. In 15, 30 minutes, if you guys don't ask too many questions, you will be light years of where you're at right now on knowing what to do with this dilemma you have with this board, and it's related to everything Mr. Bond told you just a while ago. Why you should be had this pocket. Excuse my term, but that's just my opinion. Are you willing to go through that?
Mr. Kirkland, I apologize, but I'm not following you, and I have no clue what you're talking about in the least. Are you asking that you would like to provide us with some documents?
I would like to do a presentation.
A 20-minute presentation to the board?
Well, we should be able to get enough in it by then if you don't want to hear what's going on. You'll be looking at the documents. They'll be in your hand. We even have them on CD.
In reference to what?
On reference to electronic healthcare records. With questions like, if all this stuff, there's only 2 or 3 people involved in this, what he's involved in.
Okay, so is this relevant to this examination? Help me connect the dots.
If you let me finish my sentence, maybe that would help. How in the world, when I sit here and hand you a paper showing that over 90% of the hospitals and doctors in this nation are already using a electronic health record system which is free to the patients. Now, we're going to document it. We're not going to just frank babbling. We're going to give you the documents. Put them in your hand.
Okay, but tie this back to the motion on the table about the examination.
how it ties to it is you guys have a dilemma. You're blowing money out the yin yang, trying to come up with had this thing and going on. If you had a 30-minute education, you might think about this thing differently. It'll be up to you guys what decision you make once we give you the facts and data from the federal website on this whole thing, on what he's talking about. I do not see, with what little education I got on it, which is way more further than what he's telling us, I don't see that he would be able to do anything other than develop software if he was qualified and certified and hooked up with them. And if he'd have showed you those documents, then even that butthole would be a little more happy. He has not produced anything that means anything about anything. And Mr. Carter, no disrespect, but he is paid to try to move this thing out for you guys, and you ain't going nowhere there either. That whole thing, and I think if he tells you the truth, he'll tell you you're not going nowhere. I think he disclaims most everything he does.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kirkland.
Frank, I wouldn't mind listening to your thing, but right now, we're just gonna vote on trying to get more information. I wouldn't mind hearing your presentation, but this vote is.
Okay. Well, you know, even if you want to have a workshop, I've got quite a few hours, a lot of money in this. I've probably got $15,000-$20,000 in ink and paper and money invested in following this county for a long time. And maybe some of the things I've been saying is wrong. But,
Okay, Mr. Kirkland,
but you can have a workshop. We'll come do that.
well, I don't think that your comments are relevant to where we're at in this motion.
Well, then how was Mr. Bond's
So,
comments relative to it? He
So
was
then-
talking about what I'm talking
He's
about.
a presenter, and this is public comment. So I'm going to ask you to take your seat. We're not going to entertain a presentation at this time. But I do appreciate your interest in the project, and I would like to ask that you leave the information so the board can have your information and consider it for a future
If you're
presentation.
not going to allow it publicly, blankly.
Okay, then we appreciate your time. Mr. Coleman.
Thank you. Henry Coleman, Bowling Green. Thanks for taking all this time looking at this project. I think we all agree it needs to be reconciled. It needs to be looked at in totality. I do believe and I do know for a fact that the examination procedure that was done did not look at most of this project. It only looked, Mr. Carter is only looking to see if he can find money that says was spent. What it's not looking at, and this is what Mr. Samuels is trying to say, if you submit draw requests or invoices, a detailed list, one level deep from one company to another, hours of work by coders, etc., mentors, down to the nearest tenth of an hour. All of the numbers are down to the nearest penny. And now we're going back and calling these estimates. They were estimates that we didn't know at the time. It was not discovered they were estimates until November 5th of 2014 at a meeting. All of this stuff that happened. It's very clear to me that the approach that should be taken, that had there been somebody, Casey Dixon or somebody that was actually verifying, and this is the point of my 3 minutes right here. You have to verify that every penny was spent for the best purposes under the project, and it actually went toward furthering the project, and it was the best way that money could have been spent. That's the burden of proof. So when Mr. Carter put together the examination, he did not look to see if they were actually, those hours actually happened. There were no logs
There were no way mentors, there were no records, there were personnel files, training records, any of the stuff, none of the stuff lower than that one level invoice that was detailed to the nearest tenth of an hour, let's say, the nearest penny, that was presented as factual invoices. They were receipts, they were invoices. I want you to pay me this amount of money to this penny for the last month. Now, even if he put that together in January for the first 3 months of the continuing labs, why would those be estimates? He's already booked those expenses. Those expenses shouldn't be estimates. They were put together after the fact. You can't say they were guesstimates at this point. You certainly can't say at a certain point down the road there was in-kind contributions, and let's just say that a lot of that money put somebody in Bermuda or bought somebody a new car or something, whatever. You made an estimate on a licensing thing or some other investor. You can't do that.
Final comments, Mr. Coleman.
You have to look at the record. And Mr. Carter, what he did was only the first part. Now someone has to verify. Once you say, yes, this amount was spent, then you have to determine, was it spent for the best purposes of the project? That's the burden. That's what you have to do.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Coleman. Do we have any other public comments? Yes, Mrs. Cole?
Hi, I'm Nicole. I don't think we need to put Travis Bond through an additional review or financial statement. When you think about it, he met the requirements of the contract he entered into. The board should have put more. There were no benchmarks for him to meet. There was no real oversight on the monthly distribution. There were the contractual obligations were kind of vague. And with the $140,000, yeah, in a perfect world, it would all be accounted for. But over $7.25 million, if you're talking about $140,000, it's 1.9%. It's immaterial. But I think going forward, Mr. Bond did exactly what we told him to do. But going forward, we need better contracts, they need to have better oversight, and we need to make sure that they're meeting contractual obligations and, set benchmarks. We want so many employees at this date before more money. Just my opinion.
Thank you, Mrs. Cole. I think we agree with those recommendations. Mr. Chansey?
Donald Chansey, 1224 Pine Drive, Wachula, Florida. I couldn't hear in the back of the room when Mr. Samuels asked Mr. Carter if the heat got turned up, who was ultimately responsible. What was the answer to that question?
Ultimately, that it is the board's oversight.
This board?
Yes.
Okay. Now, it says, and last month Mr. Carter also said that it was up to the management board to allow or disallow. And it said on here on item number 4, we were going to have a management response. Well, what I heard was a county employee explaining Mr. Bond's position. I did not hear anything from the management board other than a few questions. So I would like to hear the true management response and not from a county employee. At the last month meeting, I think Mr. Carter said it twice, that if this board, which is a responsible board, didn't do anything, that the Board of County Commissioners was the ultimate responsible party. Is that a true statement?
I didn't say that.
I don't recall that statement being made.
Well, we can go back and get the tape on that.
I think it should, because I know I didn't make that statement.
Who is the original agreement for the money made with? It's made with the Board of County Commissioners and Mosaic. Has nothing to do with the IDA.
Are you referring to the Mosaic agreement or the
Yes.
Continuum Labs contract?
Well, on that particular, I'm talking about the Mosaic, but I'll skip that because you're not going to allow that. That's fine. Mr. Carter, the 43% that you looked at, what was the total dollar estimated spent of the 43%?
If you would address your questions to the board.
Mr. Chairman, would you please ask Mr. Carter and he stated that he looked at the 43% of the spent revenue. Approximately how much is that?
How much,
In
it's
dollar
40,
value.
it's 43% of $7.25 million.
No. 43% that he looked at of documents.
He looked at 25%
No,
of
he
the
said he looked
documents
at
which
40.
accounted for 43% of the overall spend.
We looked at 25% of the draws, and that accounted for
43% of the revenue spent.
$3,092,374.
How much?
$3,092,374.
Okay. Back in the initial contract agreement, was the license agreement with Mr. Bond ever discussed to this board as management? That there was going to be a fee?
The license agreement was included in the original LifeSync contract.
And it was
There was
explained
a-
how much they were going to get paid for.
That conversation would have happened 3 years ago, so I can't tell you what the conversation of the board was, but I can tell you that you review the public record, the LifeSync contract includes a schedule that includes the API fee.
Okay, on the sampling that they did, they said they spent 700 hours. How much did that sampling cost the IDA taxpayers, whatever?
Are you asking how much have we spent on the
On just
audit?
the sampling, no, it's not an audit, on the sampling.
Okay, before we address that question, I want to make sure, because we've exceeded your time. Are there any other questions that,
Okay.
let's go ahead and give us
One
all
more-
your
two
questions
more
and then
things,
we'll
a
address them.
comment. Mr. Grant, at the end of the last meeting, stood up and said they were a viable company, but they couldn't make it without the cooperation of Hardy County, and they can't pay the rent. How are they gonna pay for a certified public accountant? Are they gonna hand you the bill? Number two, I think you really need to applaud the Hardy High School program. Both of my daughters came out of the high school, honors and everything else, but guess what? They also have a CNA program degree. If that's all so special, well then applaud Hardy High School. It is an achievement, but basically it allows you to go work at a nursing home, change bedpans, take blood pressure. If it's all that, thank you very much. Hardy High School does 4 times the numbers that they do.
So I would like to address a couple of your comments and things that you've said, Mr. Chansey.
Okay?
I think that we can answer for how much the audit has cost Hardy County, and then I would like to address the comments that you've made after that. Do you have an updated amount on what we have paid so far for the audit? Currently, we're at roughly $55,000 in expenses on the examination. So does that answer your question on that issue?
On that issue, yes.
Okay. You made reference to statements made by Mr. Bond that he cannot further this company without the partnership of Hardy County. So I want
Mr.
to,
Grant. Mr. Grant, at the end of the 3-minute section of the last meeting, said he was a viable company, but he couldn't make it without the cooperation and the help of Hardy County, because they can't pay the rent.
I don't think that had anything to do with can't pay the rent. That was not part of that discussion. The issue with their participation in Hardy County is going to very soon be a human capital issue, because they are currently seeking to hire additional jobs in Hardy County, and we're going to reach a point where they're going to have to continue recruiting at a fairly accelerated pace to keep in front of the contracts that they're bringing on board to service their patients. I don't recall, and I'm open to other board members for correction, any comment being made that they can't pay the rent, that wouldn't be a future discussion.
Listen to the end of the tape last month.
They're not currently paying rent, but I think that no one has ever said that they can't, aren't willing to, haven't had some discussion on. So I think that you might be misreading that. I'd like to comment also on the CNA program. I don't agree with you that you come out of that program able to change bedpans and whatever else you mentioned. I personally graduated from the CNA program at Hardy Senior High School, and I agree that I'm very proud of that program, and I'm excited that we have students that will graduate high school with the opportunity.
But what does
to
it
get,
allow you to do?
I would say that
Let's be
if
honest.
you
What does it
come
allow
out
you
of
to
the
do?
high school with a CNA certification, you have demonstrated medical technology terms, you've tested on that, you've passed state licensing boards that you have to be familiar with, all of those terms and the terminology, and understand basic medical charting, in addition to the clinical aspect, which is what you're referring to. So I think that that is an appropriate foundation for this company and what they are trying to
Oh, I
do.
applaud them, but they make it sound like it's such a great thing. If that's such a great thing, then applaud Hardy High School.
Well,
You're even
they-
a recipient of it.
They're thrilled that Hardy High School has
I'm glad-
this
I'm glad
program.
you got your CNA. I'm glad my daughter got her CNA.
I don't understand what point you're trying to make in
It's such a
diminishing.
big thing.
I think it is a big deal that we have a private company that is offering to train their staff for free through this program. I think that is a big deal because there are people in Hardy County that haven't taken advantage of the program as they went through the high school, and they would have to pay
So if this
at
ever
any
fails,
other.
they can go get a CNA job. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I got one comment I want to make. Yes, Mr. Grant did say without the support of Hardy County, Virginia Labs will not make it, and that is true. That's in any place that you want to open up a business. If you don't have county support, it's not going to work. With the economic terrorists we have operating in this county, it's going to be very difficult for a business to want to come to Hardy County.
What was it, the API in LifeSync, that was about 600,000 or 1.2 million or something? Is that my question is that the licensing agreement, is that the same thing as the licensing agreement?
I believe that's different.
Is it different?
Mr. Bond can explain it better than I can.
Okay, the reason I'm asking before you answer, Mr. Bond, is that if we paid that money for the licensing fee in the beginning, why would we pay it monthly? So that's what.
No difference than you building a road and then the county charging taxes to make the road out. It's the same. Same exists. Just because you buy a thing doesn't mean that thing doesn't fit the part needs. So it's the same principle.
But it's the same product though. It's the same thing.
No, the product always evolves, just like you would say.
Well, I know it evolves, especially in technology. It does evolve, that is for sure. But are we talking about the same licensing agreement? Is the API money that we paid out the same licensing product, I guess it is, that we paid monthly?
The API would have been that would be like the initial hookup, like the initial construction. But, as Mr. Vaughn mentioned, there's ongoing, that's not, that's fairly customary in business that if you buy, in the banking industry, if we bought a software to, run our services, and we had to subscribe to ongoing updates and maintenance because we're not getting what we need out of the software. It's you pay the big money up front for the software, but then you have ongoing maintenance if you want to continue utilizing that. From time to time, companies say we're no longer providing updates or maintenance or support, so you need to upgrade to this whole other software package. So this is an ongoing licensing that is now pushed in as part of the project, and it is a part of CareSync now.
That's what I'm asking. Is it the same product with the upgrades that you do monthly or what? But it's the same thing. We're talking about the same thing. Is that right or wrong?
We're talking about modifications and upgrades to the API. Right.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to resume public comment. So,
Hi, Danielle White, 810 Shaven Circle, Washington. I'm just getting my feet wet in all of this. I've never really heard of grants starting businesses. Usually it's private individuals putting up their money to start businesses. So this is new to me. But I do know that there's an ongoing complexity with this as far as knowing exactly excuse me, where the money has gone to. And I think the question is going to continue until you do a full audit. And I think that's probably going to be the only way that you can finally put all of this to rest and have the people of Hardy County feel like the board is responsible to them and the money that is being spent. but I think that'd probably be, you've already spent $55,000 and you've still got questions. So you might as well just go ahead and do the whole shebang, and then there won't be any more questions. That's it, people. You know, don't be stirring up the pot.
Thank you for your comments. Any other public comments? Mrs. Bellflower?
Pam Bellflower, 220 Old Home, the city. My question is, did Clifton Larson Allen do an examination on some of the terms of the contract, not just the money? I mean, the terms of the contract for the classes, remember there's supposed to be one class of so many people, and then another class, and another time of so many more people, and a third class. And it delineated in that contract exactly who those people would be. And also, another term of the contract was that Continuum Labs was to bring in other tech businesses to be in that building. And then another part of my question is, was there, and where is it, the hard signed contract between the IDA and Continuum Labs for that, what are you calling it, API, and the monthly licensing platform? I could not ever find one on the website nor in the contract. There should have been some sort of contract, because if you look up a software licensing on the internet, it tells you that there should be a contract between the person holding the license and whoever is using that license. So those are some questions I would like answered, please.
Okay. I think you can address the first portion of your questions. Clifton Larson Allen's engagement was to review this on the financial components and the financial aspects. We're not proposing this as a closeout of this project, and the terms of the contract, I think, would still at a future point be discussed and debated among the board members. So they were not engaged to do those items that you mentioned in the first part of your question. On the second part of your question about the API licensing, the licensing was not a contract between the IDA and Mr. Bond. The licensing was a contract where he was the contractor on the project. The initial project was LifeSync. So that contract, if it existed, would exist between those parties and not between Mr. Bond and the IDA. Any other public comment? If not, we have a motion on the table and it has been properly seconded. All those in favor of the motion? Anyone opposed? Okay, we are going to take a brief 5-minute break, and we will return at, well, let's make it 8 minutes, and we'll return at 10 after.